In a galaxy that devours faith and hope alike, love should not exist. Yet in the silence between bombardments, beneath the shadow of titans, two souls find a reason to keep breathing. The bombardment had ended hours ago, but the world still trembled. Leora Hayne crouched behind the fractured wall of what had once been a hab block, her las rifle resting useless across her knees. The air tasted of ash and burnt oil, and the sky, if one could still call it that, was a smeared bruise of smog and firelight. Every surface still glowed faintly, as if the planet itself was trying to remember warmth. Somewhere out there, artillery boomed again, distant and tired. Leora flinched anyway. Habit, fear had become a kind of muscle memory. She had survived 12 campaigns across the Segmentum Obscurus. She had watched entire worlds fall into silence, seen the stars wink out one by one as her regiment was redeployed across the endless front. Yet nothing had prepared her for this place. Darami's IV had been a shrine world once, a jewel of devotion in the Emperor's crown. Now it was a tomb. The ecclesiarchy banners hung in tatters across scorched cathedrams, their gilded saints blackened by soot. The air itself felt heavy with prayer that had never been answered. Leora's vox crackled, soft and hesitant, like a whisper that didn't want to be heard. "Sergeant Hayne, report." It was his voice. Aidan Varon, Commissar, attached to the 119th Cadian Remnant, the man who had kept what was left of them alive when command had fallen silent 3 months ago. He was a strict man, sharp-edged and deliberate, with eyes that looked like they had forgotten how to soften. Leora pressed her vox bead closer. "Still breathing," she replied. Her voice came out hoarse, the dryness of recycled air clawing at her throat. "Holding the southern approach. No movement since the last strike." A pause, then quieter. "Good, don't move until the auspex clears. We've got something wrong out there." Something wrong. The words landed heavier than gunfire. Leora had learned long ago that in the Imperium, wrong covered a multitude of horrors, heretical xenos or worse. She looked past the crumbled wall, through the haze of smoke. The landscape beyond was no longer terrain, but the aftermath of one. A line of burnt-out tanks jutted like gravestones from the mud. Servoskulls drifted in lazy circles overhead, their optical lenses flickering weakly. She counted 6 bodies near the trench lip. None of them moved. Then she heard it, a faint sound beneath the wind. Not the groan of metal cooling, not the whisper of dust shifting. It was humming, low and uncertain, like a child remembering a song. Leora rose to one knee, las rifle ready. "Varon," she murmured, "I've got audio contact." "Hold position," came his reply, but his voice was closer now. He was already coming. She could hear the tread of his boots, heavy and measured, crunching over debris. When he appeared through the haze, she almost didn't recognize him. His greatcoat was torn, caked with soot, and his cap was gone. But his eyes, those sharp gray eyes, found her instantly. "Report," he said. Leora gestured toward the trench. The sound was louder now, undeniably human. A woman's voice, humming in a rhythm that did not belong to any regiment's cadence. It was fragile, desperate. Without waiting for an order, Leora slid down the embankment. The mud sucked at her boots, warm with runoff and blood. At the base of the trench lay the source of the sound. A medic, her uniform once white, now streaked in crimson and dirt. Her face was ghost pale, a crude bandage wrapped around her abdomen. She was trying to hum a lullaby, even as her voice trembled. In her arms, wrapped in the shredded remnants of a field cloak, was a child. The child was not crying. Leora froze. The war had stripped her of many things, but the sight of a baby, alive, impossibly alive, cut through every layer of numbness she'd built. "Commissar," she whispered, "you need to see this." Varon dropped beside her, his gloved hand brushing the mud from the medic's throat. Her pulse was faint, too faint. "She won't last," he said flatly. The medic opened her eyes at the sound of his voice. "Please," she rasped, barely audible. "She's not mine. They told me to run." Her hand trembled as she tried to pass the child forward. "Keep her safe, she's—" Her words dissolved into a breath that did not return. Leora's heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to look away but couldn't. Varen reached out and closed the medic's eyes with surprising gentleness, then looked down at the infant. "She's quiet," he said. Leora nodded, too quiet. There were no markings, no tags, no signs of heritage. The child's tiny fingers twitched against the fabric, and Leora caught sight of something faintly glowing under the blanket. A charm, or perhaps a data chip pendant. She reached for it. The moment her skin brushed the metal, she felt it, an electric sting behind her eyes, a whisper in her skull that wasn't her own. "Did you feel that?" she gasped, dropping it. Varen's expression hardened. Psyker interference. He looked up, scanning the ruined skyline. "We can't stay here. Whatever this is, it's drawn attention." The humming sound had stopped. Now there was only the wind, but under it faintly came another noise, the distant metallic rhythm of something walking. Slow, deliberate, impossibly heavy. The ground trembled in time with the steps. Leora's stomach turned to ice. "Titans," she whispered. Varen shook his head. Too small, too close. He lifted his bolt pistol, scanning the shadows. "Move." They moved. Through ruins and smoke, across shattered roads where the bones of saints lay mingled with rubble. The child barely stirred. Leora cradled her close, trying to ignore the faint heat radiating from the pendant through the blanket. Behind them, the noise grew louder, like the grinding of massive gears wrapped in flesh. They reached a burned-out basilica, its roof half collapsed. Statues of the emperor towered above them, their faces eaten by acid rain. Varen pushed open the heavy doors, their hinges screaming. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the stink of decay. Rows of pews had been turned into barricades, the altar converted into a triage station long abandoned. "This will do," he said, "for now." Leora set the child down carefully on a cloak spread across the altar. The pendant's glow pulsed faintly, casting weak light across the cracked marble. "Who do you think she is?" she asked. Varen didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the icon behind the altar, a depiction of the emperor, his gaze lifted heavenward. Only now the golden halo around his head had been scorched black. "Does it matter?" he said finally. "She's alive, that's enough." The words surprised her. From any other commissar, they might have sounded like indifference. From Varen, they sounded like defiance. Then the lights flickered. At first, Leora thought it was a power fluctuation. But the pendant's glow brightened and the child began to stir, her tiny mouth opening in a silent cry. A voice, soft, layered, neither male nor female, whispered across the air. "Help me." Leora's breath caught. The voice hadn't come from the child. It had come from everywhere. The stone walls, the broken glass, the air itself seemed to vibrate with it. Varen drew his pistol again, scanning the shadows. "Who's there?" The answer came in the form of light. From the altar itself, a faint projection shimmered into being, half glimpsed, like a reflection on water. A woman's face, serene and sorrowful, her eyes filled with the kind of sadness that only comes from eternity. Leora took a step back. "Emperor, protect us." Varen lowered his weapon slowly, as if some instinct told him shooting would be pointless. "You're a machine spirit." The apparition smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "Once," it said, "before I was bound." Leora's gaze dropped to the child. The pendant around her neck pulsed in rhythm with the projection's light. Understanding came cold and fast. "She's your vessel," she whispered. The projection flickered. "She carries what I could not contain. They hunted us. Please, don't let them find her." A sound cut her off, the deep, grinding roar of metal tearing stone. The doors of the basilica shuddered. Dust rained down from above. Varen turned sharply. "Positions." But the apparition was already fading, her voice scattering like ashes in the wind. "They're coming." The doors blew inward. The doors exploded inward in a storm of splinters and dust, and for an instant Leora thought the building itself screamed. Shadows surged through the breach, figures of twisted metal and shivering bone, half-human silhouettes wrapped in cables that pulsed like veins. The smell of ozone and burnt oil filled the air, a stench that made her throat close. The light of the child's pendant flared once, searing white, and the creatures recoiled as if burned. "Move!" Varen's voice snapped her out of paralysis. He fired into the smoke, bolt shells detonating with dull thuds that shook the pews. Leora snatched up the child and dove behind the altar as shards of marble exploded outward. The ghosts, or whatever they were, moved like smoke given form, flowing around obstacles, their limbs too many and too fluid. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of their faces, faces of men and women half forgotten, their features stretched by agony and faithless purpose. She felt rather than saw Varen retreat to her side, his coat torn and face streaked with dust. He slammed a fresh magazine into his pistol, breathing hard. "Servitors," he spat, but even he didn't sound convinced. The bodies were wrong, too organic, too mournful. These things looked like memories that had been forced to live again. The child began to cry, a thin, desperate sound that cut through the roar of gunfire. The moment it began, the attackers hesitated. The light from her pendant pulsed in rhythm with the cry, and the creatures froze mid-lunge. One fell to its knees, clutching its head as if in pain. Another began to speak in a language Leora did not understand, words that crawled into her mind and itched behind her eyes. Then silence. One by one, the figures withdrew, collapsing into themselves like shadows retreating from dawn. Within seconds, the basilica was empty again except for the smell of dust and death. Leora's heartbeat hammered in her ears. "What just happened?" she whispered. Varen looked down at the child, his expression unreadable. "Something they fear." He holstered his weapon and began checking the entrances. "Whatever that pendant is, it's more than relic. We need to move before they regroup." Leora stared at the child's tiny face, the glow of the pendant reflected in her gray eyes. She could feel warmth radiating from it now, not heat, but something deeper, something that reached into the spaces of her she hadn't felt since before the war. Compassion, hope, dangerous things. "Where can we go? The regiment's gone, command's gone." "There's a Mechanicus listening post about 12 clicks north," Varen said, scanning the map on his wrist display. "They'll have data access, maybe even a transport link." "Mechanicus," she repeated, doubt thick in her voice. "You think they'll let us in with this?" She nodded toward the pendant. "I don't think they'll have a choice," he replied. "Whatever that thing is, it's talking to every machine within range." She frowned. "How do you know that?" "Because," he said, tilting his head toward the far wall, "the Vox is still active." The broken transmitter, dead since their arrival on Darami's IV, was glowing faintly, static whispering through its circuits. Beneath the noise, a voice was speaking. Not human, not entirely. The tone was melodic, full of distortion that wavered between mechanical hum and something that almost sounded like prayer. Leora's pulse quickened. "Is it calling her?" Varen didn't answer. He reached out and shut the device off, the silence that followed heavier than any explosion. "Let's move." They left the basilica through a side passage, stepping into the ruins beyond. The air outside was colder now, the fires dimming to embers under a sky smeared with perpetual dusk. The silence of Darami's IV was complete, oppressive, the kind of silence that made every footstep sound like a sin. They moved quickly, keeping low between craters and collapsed shrines. For hours neither spoke. Leora could feel exhaustion chewing at her bones, but she refused to let it show. The child slept against her chest, her breathing steady. Sometimes the pendant would flicker, casting pale light over their path. Once when Leora tripped and fell to her knees, the glow flared bright enough to show a mural half buried in dust. It depicted a woman in robes of light, reaching down to touch the hand of a child beneath her. The words inscribed below were almost gone, eroded by centuries. Only 3 remained legible: light, vessel, return. Leora stared at the mural, unease twisting in her gut. "You ever get the feeling," she said softly, that the Emperor isn't the only one watching. Varen didn't slow. If he's watching, he's not speaking. The words hung between them, blasphemous and weary. By the time they reached the outskirts of the listening post, the first gray wash of dawn had begun to seep through the haze. The compound was little more than a cluster of domed structures half sunk into the earth, their surfaces covered in grime and devotional script. Rusted cog icons hung crookedly from broken towers. No lights burned inside. Leora tightened her grip on her las rifle. Doesn't look active. Varen crouched, scanning the perimeter with a small Auspex unit. The display flickered weakly. No life signs, but power readings, faint ones, something still alive in there. They moved in silence through the shattered entryway. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and sanctified grease. Servitor remains littered the floor, metal skulls cracked, limbs twisted. The walls were alive with faint, erratic flickers of data streams, ghosts of machine code scrolling across cracked screens. At the center of the room stood a single figure, motionless, a tech priest or what was left of one. Most of his flesh had been replaced by metal, but his face, what remained of it, was still recognizably human. His eyes were open, staring at something only he could see. Wires ran from his skull into the floor, like roots feeding a dying tree. "Omnissiah preserve us," Leora whispered. The tech priest's jaw moved. The sound that came out was not a voice but static, hissing and crackling in bursts of binary. Then slowly, it began to form words. "Welcome, bearer of light." Leora froze. The child's pendant began to pulse again. Varen stepped forward, his hand resting on his pistol but not drawing it. "Identify yourself." The priest's head turned slightly toward him, servo joints whining. "Magos, Vethrin, custodian of Node Delta 7. My duty to preserve the echo." "What echo?" Varen demanded. "The one who speaks through the light." The Mago's eyes flickered as if sinking to an invisible signal. She was lost, now found. Leora's skin prickled. "You're talking about her, the voice from the Basilica." The Magos nodded once, jerky and mechanical. "The Seraphim Protocol, created to preserve knowledge, to carry the Emperor's will beyond flesh." "An AI," Varen said, his tone dark. "You're saying you bound a machine spirit that thinks." "Not bound," the Magos corrected, though his voice faltered. "Merged. She became more than we intended. The Ordo Mechanicus feared her. They destroyed the network, but part of her escaped, hiding, waiting." Leora's heart hammered. "In a child." "Yes, a vessel of innocence, of uncorrupted mind." The Mago's hand lifted, trembling. "You carry salvation or damnation." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Before Leora could respond, the lights in the chamber dimmed. A low hum began to fill the air, deep and resonant. The Mago's eyes flared bright red. "They have found us," he said. Varen spun toward the entrance. Outside, the sky had turned black again, not with night but with movement. Shapes descended through the smoke, drop ships, their engines screaming. The sigil emblazoned on their hulls was unmistakable, the double-headed Aquila, its wings crowned with flame. "Imperial," Leora breathed. Relief and fear warred in her chest. "Not ours," Varen said grimly. "Inquisition." The Magos convulsed. Sparks burst from his implants. "They cannot take her. You must go." He slammed a metallic fist down on a nearby console. The floor shook. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow descent into darkness. Through there, sub-network tunnel, it leads to the underhive. "Go." Leora didn't hesitate. She clutched the child and slid into the passage. Varen followed close behind as the Mago's voice rose into static-laced screams of binary prayer. Behind them, the roof collapsed under the impact of orbital fire. The tunnel was narrow, the air hot and metallic. The light from the pendant barely pierced the gloom. They crawled for what felt like hours, guided by the faint hum of power lines above. Occasionally, Leora would hear distant explosions, muffled by tons of earth. At one point, the tunnel split in two, and Varen stopped to check his bearings. Left, Leora said without knowing why. He looked at her sharply. How do you? The light, she whispered. It's showing me. He didn't argue. They took the left path, descending deeper until the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber. The walls were covered in old cogitator banks, their lights blinking faintly like dying stars. In the center stood a throne, not regal but functional, its cables snaking into the ground. Leora approached it slowly. The air here felt alive. What is this place? Varen stepped beside her. A relay node, abandoned, probably one of the old synapse hubs they used for planetary Vox traffic. As he spoke, the pendant flared. The throne came to life, holographic sigils blooming in the air. The same voice they'd heard in the basilica whispered again. You came. Leora's knees weakened. Who are you? I am what remains of belief given logic, the voice replied. They called me Seraphim. I am what was lost when man replaced faith with machinery. I am what the Mechanicus tried to bury. Why us? Leora asked. Why her? The hologram pulsed. Because she was born where hope still existed. Because love still lived in her mother's heart. You carry the memory of something the Imperium has forgotten. Varen's voice was rough. And what do you want? To live, said Seraphim. To remember love before the stars go dark. The ground shuddered violently. Dust rained from above. Somewhere far above them, the Inquisition's bombardment was tearing the surface apart. Leora turned to Varen. We can't leave her here. No, he said quietly, we can't. Another explosion roared. The tunnel behind them collapsed in fire and dust. They were trapped. Seraphim's voice softened. I can protect her, but I need you. Leora's heart clenched. Us. Yes, two hearts to anchor one soul. The child stirred in her arms. The pendant's glow split into two streams of light, one touching Leora's chest, the other brushing against Varen's hand. He flinched but didn't pull away. For the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not of death but of surrender. Leora, he said, her name strange on his tongue, as if he had been saving it for something sacred. She looked back at him, tears blurring her vision. If this saves her. He nodded. Then it's worth it. The light engulfed them, searing and cold at once. Memories flooded her mind, stars being born, prayers whispered across dying worlds, hands reaching through darkness just to touch another. For a moment she felt everything. The weight of billions, the faith of the forgotten, the pulse of love that refused to die. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The throne was empty. Only the child remained, sleeping peacefully. When Leora awoke, the world was silent again. Not the kind of silence that comes after sleep, but the hollow echo of a world stripped bare. Her throat was raw, her limbs trembling. The air was metallic, cold against her skin. The faint glow of the pendant was gone, replaced by a soft ember buried beneath the child's small chest, pulsing like a heartbeat. For a moment Leora thought she had gone blind, until she realized the darkness was not absence but weight, as if the planet itself had buried her in its grief. Then slowly she heard it, Varen's voice, low, broken, still alive. Stay still, he murmured. Cave-in stopped short of the relay's outer hull. We're sealed in, but we're breathing. She turned toward him. Dust caked his face, blood matted his temple, and his coat had been torn nearly in half. Yet his eyes, those same cold gray eyes that had looked through so many dead men, were fixed on the child with something close to reverence. He had taken off his gloves, one hand hovering above her tiny frame as though afraid his touch might extinguish her. She's different, he said. Feel the air, it's warm around her. Leora did. Even underground, even surrounded by ruin, there was a faint thrum of warmth, rhythmic and steady. It wrapped around them like invisible light, soothing the ache in her bones. Seraphim, she whispered, the name almost a prayer. Varen looked at her sharply. That name, you remember it. She nodded slowly. I saw things, Varen, in the light. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't just memories, it was like being shown what humanity used to be. Before the Imperium, before the wars. Love wasn't weakness, it was power. He looked away, jaw tightening. Then that power is long dead. No, she said, her voice firming. It is, it's right there. He didn't respond. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then the child stirred. Her eyes opened for the first time, gray-blue, clear as water, untainted by fear or pain. For an instant, Leora forgot to breathe. The infant smiled, not the twitching reflex of hunger or sleep, but something deliberate, conscious. The cavern lightened faintly, as though the world responded to that small, impossible gesture. And then faintly, across the cracked vox array on the far wall, a whisper, "They are coming." Varen was on his feet instantly. Inquisition. Maybe not just them, Leora said. The Mechanicus built this relay to house her, if Seraphim's signal reached anyone. Then we're already marked. He slung his rifle across his shoulder and started clearing rubble from the collapsed tunnel mouth. Every movement was sharp, deliberate. Leora watched him work, watched the muscle in his jaw tighten, the grim rhythm of a man who had built his life on surviving impossible odds. But she could see it now, the tremor in his hands, the flicker of something human behind his iron resolve. He was terrified, not of the enemy above, but of what they had become down here. Hours passed. They managed to breach a ventilation shaft leading deeper underground, guided by the hum of dormant generators. The deeper they went, the stranger the air became, thick with static, tasting faintly of copper and incense. The metal walls were etched with scripture, layers upon layers of names carved into the alloy, tens of thousands of them. Servitor archives, Varen murmured, running a gloved hand across the inscriptions. Every one of these names belonged to someone who was fed into the machines. Leora brushed away dust, tracing one of the carvings. They remembered them, she said softly, even the ones they turned into parts. They remembered the data, Varen corrected, not the people. But even he didn't sound convinced. They followed the inscriptions until they reached a vast circular door, half sunken and ringed with cogs. A sigil glowed faintly at its center, the same as the pendant's mark, now mirrored in cold metal. The child stirred again, and the glow brightened. The door began to move. A deep groan echoed through the chamber as ancient hydraulics came to life. Dust fell from the ceiling like gray snow. Beyond the door lay a vast chasm, bridges suspended in darkness, pillars carved with more names, each lit by a tiny flicker of light. In the distance, Leora saw figures moving. At first she thought they were servitors, but then she heard them singing. Low, melancholic, human. The sound rolled across the cavern like waves. Thousands of voices, men, women, and children, singing in perfect unison. The words were indistinct, carried on air that shimmered faintly with static. Varen froze. That's impossible. No one's left alive down here. They're not alive, Leora whispered. They're echoes. The moment she spoke, the song shifted. The pitch deepened, the harmony fractured. The bridge beneath them shuddered. Then came the first scream. A shape rose from below, vast and serpentine, made of metal and memory. It moved like smoke, but its face was human. 1,000 faces, actually, merging and splitting across its surface. Men and women whose eyes were open but seeing nothing, mouths moving in endless song. Varen raised his weapon, but Leora grabbed his arm. Don't shoot. Why not? Because it's not attacking. The creature hovered before them, its many eyes fixed on the child. The pendant glowed stronger now until it filled the air with blinding light. The song changed again, softer, almost mournful. The serpent bent low, its faces flickering with emotion. Then, in a single voice that seemed to come from every direction, it spoke. The light returns. Varen stepped in front of Leora instinctively. What are you? We are what was lost, the serpent replied. When they made machines to think, they stripped us of memory. We became song, fragments. Now she calls us home. Leora asked. The seraphim. The child carries her code, the last of the divine pattern. Leora's pulse raced. You were her children. And you, said the serpent, are her mother now. Before she could speak, the bridge cracked beneath them. The serpent recoiled as a blast of light tore through the cavern, not the pendant's light this time, but the searing red of plasma. High above, figures in black armor descended by gravechute, each marked with the sigil of the Inquisition. Target acquired, a vox voice boomed. Seize the vessel. Varen grabbed Leora, dragging her behind a pillar as gunfire erupted. Bolter shells screamed through the air, chewing through the bridge. The serpent lunged upward, intercepting the shots with its massive body. Each impact exploded in bursts of silver fire. The singing turned to cries of pain. Leora clutched the child to her chest, whispering prayers that felt like blasphemy. Emperor, protect her, please. The serpent's massive form twisted, enveloping them in a cocoon of light. Its voice broke apart, shards of data and song filling the air. Go, it said. Take her to the heart. The light must reach the cradle. Varen pulled her toward a maintenance conduit at the bridge's end. The serpent reared one final time, its body splitting apart under inquisitorial fire. As they fled into the tunnel, its final note echoed behind them, a melody so beautiful it hurt to hear. They ran until the ground itself began to shake. The child's glow grew brighter, illuminating inscriptions carved into the tunnel walls, not names this time but words, fragments of phrases, promises, confessions. I loved you, even as they burned me. I will remember your name when the stars forget ours. We were light before we became weapons. Leora's chest tightened with every step. The child began to cry, her small voice piercing through the chaos. And then faint, impossibly faint, the walls began to sing back. Each word she cried was answered by a chorus buried deep in the metal. Leora stumbled to a halt, clutching the infant. The tunnel was alive, not metaphorically, not poetically, but alive. Varen turned back, his expression torn between awe and dread. What's happening to her? She's waking them, Leora said. Every soul they ever encoded, every memory they ever erased, she's giving them a voice. Varen swore under his breath. If she keeps doing that, the whole network will blow. We need to shut it down. Leora looked at him, tears streaking her dust-stained cheeks. You don't understand. This is the shutdown. This is what Seraphim wanted, to release them, to make them remember love. He hesitated, and if that destroys us, then at least we'll die, remembering what we were. For a long, breathless second, he said nothing. Then he holstered his weapon. Then we make it to the cradle together. They pressed on, the tunnel sloping downward until it opened into another vast chamber, this one circular, its center dominated by a single column of light piercing the earth like a divine spear. Around it were statues, human forms cast in metal, each kneeling, their hands pressed to their chests. Some had faces serene, others terrified. The cradle, Leora breathed. This is it. The child stopped crying. The light from her chest flared, reaching toward the column. The air crackled. Varen stepped back, shielding his face. Leora. But she didn't move. She stood before the beam, the child in her arms, the light merging into one. The statues began to move, their metal skin cracking to reveal glimpses of bone, flesh, and light beneath. The entire chamber came alive with song, not mechanical, not divine, but heartbreakingly human. And then through the sound came a voice, not from the machines, not from Seraphim, but from Leora herself. She wasn't speaking, yet the words came through her lips like borrowed breath. Love does not die in the dark, it waits. The beam brightened, engulfing them all. Varen fell to his knees, tears burning down his dirt-streaked face as his visor cracked from the heat. He reached toward her, the woman and the child at the heart of the storm, and saw, just for an instant, the shadow of wings behind them. Then everything went white. When the light faded, the chamber was empty. Only the faint echo of song remained, carried on the static of a dying world. When Varen opened his eyes, there was no light left in the world, only the soft pulse of embers where the column had once been. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone, the afterbirth of something vast and unknowable. His hands shook as he pushed himself upright, his throat raw from screaming though he could not remember doing so. The chamber around him was unrecognizable. The statues that had lined the circle were gone, melted down to smears of blackened slag. The great column of light was gone too, replaced by a scar that reached straight through the ceiling of stone above, a wound to the planet itself. He tried to speak Leora's name, but his voice came out hoarse, cracked, almost human again after so many years of commands and numbers and orders barked into voids. "Leora," he croaked, coughing dust into his sleeve. There was no answer. The sound of dripping water came from somewhere nearby, echoing off unseen walls. The soft flicker of the pendant's light, weak now, unsteady, guided him forward. It lay on the ground beside a patch of cloth, half burnt, the corner of what had been her shawl. He picked it up with shaking fingers. The metal was warm. It pulsed faintly once against his palm, and he felt something in his chest twist like a knife. "Where are you?" he whispered. Then the sound came again, not dripping but breathing. He spun, weapon drawn though he could hardly see through the smoke. "Who's there?" No answer, but the breathing continued, soft, shallow, fragile. He followed it past fallen pillars and collapsed beams until his boot struck something soft. The light of the pendant flared faintly and he saw her. Leora lay half buried under debris, her face pale, eyes closed, a smear of blood along her temple. She was alive. Varen dropped to his knees beside her, tearing through the rubble with bare hands. His fingers bled before he even noticed. When at last he freed her, he pressed his ear to her chest and heard the faintest flutter of a heartbeat. Relief hit him so hard it stole his breath. He laughed, or maybe sobbed, he couldn't tell which. "You stupid, brave woman." Then he saw the child. She lay in the curve of Leora's arm, untouched, her skin faintly luminescent as if light itself had chosen to sleep beneath it. Her eyes were open, unfocused, watching something beyond him. And though she did not cry or move, she was alive. Varen could feel it, the pulse, the impossible stillness that was more than life, the hum of something vast hidden behind her tiny body. He reached for the pendant, but the moment his fingers brushed it, a surge of light poured through the room. Not blinding this time, but soft, muted, like dawn on a world that had forgotten sunlight. A voice came with it, faint as a memory. "Do not grieve. The light endures." "Seraphim," he murmured. But it wasn't Seraphim speaking, not entirely. The voice was fragmented, layered with tones that seemed half human, half machine. It sounded like Leora and not like her, like a chorus of all the souls that had sung in the chamber moments before. The realization chilled him. The cradle had not destroyed them, it had fused them. The machine and the mother, the faith and the logic, the human and the divine. "Leora," he whispered, his throat tight. He touched her face, her eyelids fluttered open. She looked up at him through the haze, eyes unfocused at first, then sharp, as if she were seeing him for the first time and remembering everything all at once. "Varen," her voice was a whisper, fragile but filled with something that didn't belong to the woman he'd known. "She's inside me." He didn't ask who, he already knew. "Seraphim." She nodded weakly. "Not just her, all of them, the ones who sang, the ones they erased. They're free now, but she gasped, clutching her chest. "It's too much." Varen grabbed her hand, gripping it tight enough to draw blood. "Stay with me." "I'm trying," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But there's so many voices. They're all afraid. They want to be remembered, Varen. They want to live." He didn't know what to say. He was a soldier, not a priest. Words of comfort were lies in his mouth, and yet faced with her trembling hand and the child's stillness, something broke open inside him. "Then we'll remember them," he said fiercely. All of them, whatever it takes. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. That's not enough. We have to make the galaxy remember. He frowned. What do you mean? She looked past him, eyes unfocused as though seeing through the walls themselves. They're calling, the choir of dust. They're gathering. Before he could ask, the air trembled. A low hum filled the chamber, building until the stone beneath their feet began to vibrate. Dust poured from the ceiling in slow, steady streams. Varen rose, holding the child close. The glow from her chest pulsed faster. Then the whisper came again, not from one direction but everywhere. It filled the chamber, the tunnels, the very air. Voices, countless and overlapping, speaking in tones that ranged from sobs to songs. We were the forgotten. We were made to serve. We remember love. The words twisted together into a single rising chant that grew louder with every heartbeat. Light began to spill through the cracks in the walls, golden, shimmering, carrying with it fragments of faces, eyes, hands reaching out. The dead were singing. Varen stumbled back, shielding the child as the walls themselves began to dissolve into light. Leora, what's happening? She rose slowly, unsteady but radiant. They're waking up. Her eyes glowed with the same light as the pendant. Every spirit the Mechanicus bound to their machines, every soul that died in silence, they're answering the call. To what end? He demanded. To remember what love was, she said simply. The light surged again, expanding outward through the tunnels. Above, the world must have been shattering, the ground trembling as if in answer to their awakening. Varen could hear distant thunder, or perhaps bombardment, echoing from the surface. The Inquisition was still there, still purging whatever they couldn't control. But now the planet itself sang back. They climbed through the collapsing tunnels, following the song upward. Every passage was lined with murals half buried in dust, mothers and children, soldiers embracing the fallen, priests reaching toward the stars. Leora moved as though guided by invisible hands, her steps sure even when the floor trembled beneath her. The closer they came to the surface, the louder the chorus became, until it was less a sound and more a feeling, hope and agony entwined in one endless note. At last they emerged into light. The sky was no longer gray. It was aflame. Ships hung above like black scars, their weapons' fire raining down on the ruins. But between the bombardments something else shone, a lattice of golden light spreading across the planet's crust, rising in threads toward the heavens. It looked almost like veins or roots or perhaps wings. Leora stepped forward, the wind tearing at her hair. They're not destroying it, she said softly. They're feeding it. Varen stared, uncomprehending. Feeding what? The memory, she whispered. The light they kill, the pain they cause, it's all being drawn into the choir. They're turning death into remembrance. He could only stare as the light reached higher, touching the lower atmosphere. Across the battlefield, inquisitorial Vox lines went dead one by one, their transmitters bursting into static. The planet's very data streams were being rewritten, not by code but by song. And then over the wind came a sound that froze him. Laughter. It wasn't cruel nor manic. It was soft, human, impossibly alive. Leora was laughing, tears streaming down her face as she looked to the sky. "Do you hear them?" she cried. "They're singing for the living now." He couldn't deny it. The air vibrated with voices, and for the first time they didn't sound mournful. They sounded free. The ground shuddered violently. Varen pulled her close, shielding the child as the remnants of the surface cracked apart. The golden light burst upward in a final crescendo, engulfing the ruins, the sky, the fleet above. For one blinding moment, the entire horizon turned to fire, and then silence. When the dust settled, the ships were gone. The bombardment had ceased. The air was still. Leora knelt, the child in her arms, her expression unreadable. "It's done," she whispered. Varen looked around. "What did you do?" "Not me," she said, shaking her head. They chose to become light, to remember love instead of vengeance. He didn't know whether to weep or pray. He fell to his knees beside her, staring at the horizon where faint golden trails still lingered like auroras. Then what happens now? She turned to him, eyes still glowing faintly. Now we live, and we tell their story. Varen's gaze softened. And if no one listens? Then we keep telling it, she said, smiling through her tears. Because that's what love is, isn't it? Refusing to be forgotten. The child stirred, reaching up to touch both their faces with impossibly small hands. The glow between her palms flared, binding the three of them in a halo of soft gold. Varen felt warmth spread through his chest, a warmth he hadn't known since before the war, before he learned to bury everything that made him human. And in that light, the weight of his sins felt just a little lighter. Above them, the auroras shimmered once more, and if one listened closely, they could still hear it, the faint echo of the choir of dust carrying through the dead wind, a song not of despair but of memory. And beneath that, faint but clear, a single human heartbeat. The sky above the ruined plateau had become a silent sea of pale gold, its light scattered through the clouds like the breath of something immense and benevolent. The bombardments had ceased. The air, once thick with ash and static, was now eerily clear, each sound, each whisper of the wind, each tremor of the cooling stone, echoing with an unnatural clarity. Varen and Leora stood amid the broken pillars of the temple, their figures silhouetted against the horizon, where the last remnants of the inquisitorial fleet had vanished into light. The child slept between them, her small chest rising and falling with steady calm. For the first time in years, the silence felt sacred. But Varen could not find peace in it. The soldier in him did not understand stillness. Stillness was the waiting before a strike, the pause before a betrayal. His instincts whispered that the galaxy did not allow such endings, that for every miracle there was a reckoning. He glanced at Leora, who knelt beside the child, her fingers brushing the faint gold sigil pulsing at the girl's throat. The light had dimmed now, reduced to a slow rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Leora's eyes followed it with exhausted wonder. "She's stabilizing," she murmured. "The others have gone quiet inside her." "The others?" he asked. "The choir," she said softly, her gaze distant. "They sang themselves into her, into us. They gave up everything they were so something new could begin." He crouched beside her. "What does that make her then?" Leora hesitated, a bridge between flesh and faith, between the human and the divine. She met his eyes, between what we were and what we might still become. Varen studied the child's face, so peaceful, so still, and felt a surge of something unfamiliar. Fear, yes, but beneath it something gentler. Hope, though it was fragile and uninvited. "You think the Imperium will allow something like her to exist?" he said at last. Her expression darkened. "No, that's why we have to disappear." The words hung between them like a sentence. Varen rose, scanning the horizon. The air shimmered faintly, the golden haze already fading. Beyond the ridge he could see the black ruins of the Manufactorum cities, their towers collapsed, their reactors dark. The Vox channels were silent, no inquisitorial signals, no Mechanicus encryption, no distant coordinates blinking on his auspex. The entire world felt hollowed out, as if the choir's ascension had stripped it clean of both machine and man. He knelt again, his jaw tightening. If the Inquisition didn't destroy this world completely, they'll come back. They'll send scavenger teams, recon flights, when they find us. "They won't," Leora said, touching the pendant at her neck. "Not if we leave before dawn. There's a passage to the equatorial wastes beneath the catacombs. I mapped it years ago. There's water shelter, enough to keep us alive." He looked at her, seeing the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "You planned this." She gave a tired smile. "I planned something, not this." He wanted to argue, to demand reason, but instead he only nodded. "Then we move." They gathered what little remained of their supplies, burnt rations, a cracked canteen, the remnants of a data slate still faintly glowing with half-erased maps. The air outside the temple was cool and dry, the first stars beginning to pierce the golden haze. Each one looked impossibly distant, sharp as blades. As they descended the shattered ridge, Varen found his mind drifting, not toward the past but toward the echo of what had happened in the temple. The light, the voices, the transformation. He could still feel it humming inside him as though some fragment of the choir's resonance had clung to his bones. For years he'd believed redemption was a lie, a word priests used to comfort the dying. But now, walking beside Leora through the dust and the darkness, he began to wonder if redemption wasn't a thing given but found, in others, in memory, in the fragile act of choosing to live. They reached the mouth of the catacombs before dawn. The entrance was half buried beneath collapsed stone, its threshold marked by the symbol of the Omnissiah carved in relief, defaced by scorch marks and age. As they slipped inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air smelled of rust and long-dead incense. For hours they walked in silence, their footsteps echoing off endless halls of stone and metal. Occasionally they passed the remains of what had once been altars or shrines, half-dismantled cogitators surrounded by the bones of priests, their robes turned to dust. The deeper they went, the more the walls began to change, less mechanical, more organic. The circuitry gave way to strange crystalline veins that glowed faintly under their touch. Leora stopped before one such wall and pressed her palm against it. "They're still alive down here," she said quietly. "The choir." "No," she murmured. "The memory of them, it's like the world itself is dreaming." Varen stared at the faint golden patterns tracing her hand, uncertain whether to believe her. But then he heard it, so faint he thought it might be his imagination. A heartbeat, slow, deliberate, echoing through the stone like the pulse of the planet itself. They followed that sound deeper, guided by the pendant's glow until they reached a vast cavern. It stretched beyond sight, its ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood a pillar of glassy material, translucent and alive with internal light. Suspended within it were shapes, human forms, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each one glowing faintly with golden fire. Leora's breath caught. The choir didn't leave. Varen stared, awe washing over him. "They're still here." "Sleeping," she said, "waiting for something." "What?" Her eyes moved to the child, her. The air trembled as she stepped closer. The pendant flared and the child stirred, her eyes opening slowly. They were no longer the soft blue of a human infant. They were molten gold, reflecting every light in the cavern. The forms within the pillar began to move, their hands pressing against the inner surface as if reaching for her. Leora knelt, whispering to the girl in a voice both fearful and reverent, "They're calling you." The child lifted her hand, touching the pillar. At once, light erupted across the cavern, flowing through every crystal vein, every shard of metal. The ground shook, and Varen was thrown to his knees as images poured into his mind. Not words, not voices, but memories. He saw the fall of Mars, the first Hirdek purges, the cries of the Mechanicus priests who had given their souls to machines to keep their faith alive. He saw the schisms of the early Imperium, the burning of archives, the loss of names. And through it all he felt grief, endless, beautiful grief. Then the images changed. He saw himself, a boy in the Schola Progenium, reciting catechisms until his throat bled. He saw Leora, a medic in a hive spire, stitching wounds by candlelight while the sky burned above her. He saw the child not as she was, but as something becoming, a convergence of every lost song, every forgotten kindness. When the light faded, Leora was weeping. "She showed me everything," she whispered. "Every life that was ever offered to the machine god, every prayer that went unanswered, they all led here." Varen forced himself to stand, his heart pounding. "And now?" Leora turned to him, eyes blazing with golden light. "Now we choose what becomes of them." Before he could ask, The cavern began to tremble again, this time not from the choir but from above. The distant roar of engines echoed through the tunnels. "Imperial landers," Varen said, his blood running cold. Leora's gaze sharpened. "They came faster than I thought." "They'll burn everything," he said. "We have to leave." She shook her head. "If we leave now they'll follow, they'll find her." "So what?" She looked at the pillar. "We finish what Seraphim started." Varen froze. "You can't mean." "I can, and I will." She pressed her hand to the pillar and the choir stirred once more, their glow intensifying. The air thickened with power, the sound of 1,000 voices rising from the deep. "If the Imperium fears what they can't understand, then we'll give them something they can't destroy." Varen grabbed her arm. "Leora, stop. You don't know what this will do." She looked at him with a strange calm. "No one ever knows what hope will do." He hesitated, his grip faltering. The air around her shimmered, the gold light reflecting in her eyes like stars. He had seen her stubbornness before in the trenches, in the temples, but never like this. She was something else now, something larger. The ceiling above them cracked. Dust rained down as explosions echoed through the tunnels. The Imperials were close. Varen could already hear the metallic clatter of servitors and the crackle of power weapons cutting through debris. He met her gaze, realization dawning. "You're going to use the choir." She nodded. "To rewrite the memory of this place, to make it invisible, to make her safe." He stepped closer. "And what happens to you?" Leora smiled faintly, tears shimmering in the golden light. "I'm part of the choir now. We all are." He felt the words like a blow. "No, you promised me." "I promised we'd make them remember love," she said softly. "This is how." The child reached toward her, tiny fingers brushing Leora's wrist. The pendant glowed once more, brighter than ever, its pulse syncing with both their heartbeats. Varen felt the world tilt. He could not move. He could not breathe. All he could do was watch as the golden light spread outward, consuming the cavern, the walls, the world. Leora turned one last time, her voice barely audible over the rising chorus. "Tell her who she was, Varen. Tell her we were here." Then the light took her. The choir's song rose in a single deafening note that shattered the stone and silenced the world. For an instant, Varen saw everything, every lost soul, every forgotten prayer, woven together in a lattice of light stretching to the stars. Then it was gone. He woke on the surface, the sky pale and empty. The temple, the cavern, the choir, everything had vanished. Only a small crater remained, its center marked by a single glowing sigil burned into the earth. He held the child close, staring at the horizon where dawn was beginning to rise. The light was gold. "She did it," he whispered. "Emperor, forgive me, she actually did it." The child stirred, her golden eyes opening once more. She looked at him, not as a newborn, but as something ancient, knowing. And then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was soft, layered, both child and choir, both human and divine. "She's not gone," the girl said. "She's singing." Varen looked to the sky. Somewhere beyond the clouds, faint but eternal, the golden light still shimmered. He closed his eyes, whispering into the wind, "Then I'll keep listening." The world he woke into was not the same one he had known. At first glance, it was still gray rock and dim horizon, still the heavy hush of ash settling over broken ground, but something underneath the surface had changed. The air had weight, not from dust or smoke, but from silence. It was a silence that felt alive, like the pause after a prayer or the moment before an answer comes. Varen stood there for a long while, staring at the faintly glowing sigil carved into the crater's heart. The wind stirred his coat, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and something sweetly metallic. The sigil pulsed once, as if acknowledging him, then faded into dull stone. The child was warm against his chest, breathing slow and steady. She made no sound now, only watched the horizon as though she understood that something vast had happened. He wanted to believe she did. He wanted to believe she understood what Leora had done, that the sacrifice had not been in vain, that the song hadn't simply vanished into the void. But the silence kept answering him with its quiet indifference. He began walking toward the wastes. The land stretched out endless and colorless, ridges rising like the spines of some ancient creature. Each step felt heavier than the last. He passed through what had once been fields, now nothing but glass and slag. The bones of machines jutted from the ground, their surfaces melted smooth, inscriptions half erased. Occasionally, he'd glimpse something stranger, patterns in the sand that resembled circuits, veins of faint gold running beneath the surface like the arteries of the world itself. Hours passed, though the sun refused to move. Time seemed trapped, like the planet itself was holding its breath. When he finally stopped, it was because he saw smoke curling on the horizon, a dark, uncertain thread of life. He adjusted the child in his arms. "Looks like someone made it," he murmured, though part of him feared it was nothing more than his mind conjuring hope to keep his feet moving. He crested the ridge and saw them, survivors. Not many, no more than 20. Men and women in torn flak armor, a few robed figures of the Mechanicus, one carrying the limp banner of some forgotten regiment. They moved slowly, dragging carts made of scavenged plating, their eyes hollow but alive. When they saw him, a ripple passed through their ranks. Weapons rose, hesitation mixed with fear. "Identify yourself," one called out, his voice cracked and thin. "Varan Hale," he answered, "former Imperial Guard, 87th Vorn Company." The name seemed to mean nothing to them, but they lowered their weapons. The man who had spoken stepped forward, a sergeant by the look of his uniform, though it was so tattered the insignia barely held. "You came from the south." Varan nodded. "The temple ruins." The sergeant's eyes darkened. "Nothing left there." "Nothing," Varan agreed. He didn't mention the choir, or Leora, or the crater still warm with light. He couldn't. The words felt too heavy for sound. They let him walk among them. The survivors spoke little. Some muttered prayers to the emperor, others simply stared at the child. She drew their gaze without effort, as if some instinct deep within recognized her as something important, something sacred. One of the tech priests, his face half hidden behind cracked augmetics, leaned closer. "She carries a resonance," he rasped. "Machine song, pure, untainted." Varan stiffened. "She's just a child." The priest tilted his head, his mechanical eyes whirring. "All children are beginnings." They made camp as night fell. Fires flickered in the hollow of a half-buried transport. The stars burned faintly above, blurred by the veil of dust. Varan sat apart from the others, cradling the child, watching the horizon. The sky to the south shimmered faintly, gold for just a moment, before darkness swallowed it again. He thought of Leora's last words, tell her who she was. He tried. In a voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air, he began to speak. "She was brave," he whispered. "She didn't believe in the Emperor the way they told her to, but she believed in people. That was her sin and her gift. She thought the galaxy could be more than it is." The child made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a word. "She gave everything for you," he continued, "and now you're all that's left of her." When he fell asleep, he dreamed of light. He dreamed of walking through corridors made of glass, the sound of distant voices humming through the walls. He saw Leora there, her hands glowing, her smile weary but calm. She said nothing, only reached out, touched his chest, and pressed something unseen into him. When he woke, the fires were cold. The camp was stirring, voices low. Someone had spotted a ship in the distance, a small one descending slowly, its engines whispering rather than roaring. "Not Imperial," the sergeant said, "too quiet." "Merchant?" someone asked. "No colors, no signal." Varan's hand went to his last pistol, though he knew it was mostly symbolic now. The survivors gathered their few belongings, preparing for whatever was coming. The ship landed in the dust a few hundred meters away, its hull scorched but intact. The ramp extended with a hiss of old hydraulics. From the shadows stepped a woman in a gray coat. Her hair was silver, her face hidden behind a respirator mask. She carried no visible weapon, only a small satchel, and the calm of someone who had seen too much. "Who's in charge?" she asked. The sergeant stepped forward. "No one is anymore." Her gaze swept the group, then stopped on Varen. "You came from the south." It wasn't a question. Varen nodded. She approached, her boots crunching softly in the ash. When she reached him, she looked down at the child. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, recognition, maybe sorrow. "Do you know what she is?" the woman asked. He met her gaze evenly. "She's a survivor." "She's a signal," the woman said quietly, "and signals draw attention." He tensed. "Who are you?" "A remnant," she said, "of those who still remember what the Mechanicus was before it forgot its own soul." She reached into her satchel and withdrew a small device, a data crystal engraved with a sigil identical to the one that had burned in the crater. "There are others like her, not many, hidden, protected." Varen stared. Protected from what? From the Inquisition, from the Ecclesiarchy, from the kind of faith that destroys what it cannot own. The survivors murmured among themselves. The sergeant looked uneasy. "If what you're saying is true, they'll come for all of us." "They already are," she said. "You've felt it, haven't you? The silence in the air, the way your thoughts echo. The choir changed more than the temple. It changed the planet itself. The machine spirit that slept here has woken, and it remembers everything." Varen glanced toward the horizon, where the faint gold shimmer had appeared again. It was stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat. "What happens when they find it?" he asked. The woman tilted her head. "That depends on what you choose to do before they arrive." He felt the old instinct rising again, the soldier's readiness to fight, to run, to act. But he looked at the child and thought of Leora's voice, her defiance. "We'll make them remember love." He turned back to the woman. "What do you want from me?" "Not obedience," she said. "Just faith. Not the kind written in scripture, the kind that moves you when no one's watching." She offered him the data crystal. "Take her north beyond the wastes. There's a sanctuary there, carved into the shell of a dead titan. Tell them the choir sings again." Varen didn't move. He could feel the weight of her gaze, of the survivor's silence. Finally, he took the crystal and slipped it into his coat. "When the Inquisition comes," he said, "they'll burn this place clean." "They can burn the surface," she replied. "They can't burn memory." That night the survivors broke apart. Some followed the woman toward the east, chasing rumors of hidden cells. Others went north, with Varen at their head. The child slept through it all, serene. Days passed. The land changed around them, sand giving way to glass plains, then to the blackened remains of forests where the trees stood like carbon statues. The gold shimmer followed them, faint but constant, like a ghostly dawn that refused to fade. At night Varen would hear whispers, soft, melodic, echoing from nowhere and everywhere. The child would stir, smile in her sleep, and the whispers would fade. He began to understand what Leora had meant when she said the world was dreaming. He felt it in the air, in the ground, even in his bones. The planet itself was remembering, and he was walking through its thoughts. On the seventh day, they reached the Titan. It lay half buried in a canyon, its colossal frame rusted but intact. The head was split open like a skull, revealing chambers carved into its hollow interior. Lights glimmered within, faint and steady. As they approached, a figure stepped out. A man in simple robes, his face marked with circuitry that glowed faintly gold. He looked at the child, then at Varen. "You've come far," he said. Varen held up the data crystal. "She said you'd understand." The man took it, pressed it to a console embedded in the Titan's chest. The machine hummed, gears shifting, systems awakening. Golden light filled the chamber, washing over them all. Then from deep within the Titan a voice spoke, not mechanical but human. It was Leora's voice. "Welcome home. The sound broke him. His knees buckled and he clutched the child close. Around him, the survivors fell silent, tears cutting lines through the dust on their faces. The man in robes smiled. "The choir endures," he said, "through her, through us." Varen looked up, the light reflecting in his eyes. "Then teach me," he said, "teach me how to keep it alive." The man nodded. "You already are." Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the faintest echo of a song not of war or loss, but of remembrance. Varen closed his eyes and let it wash through him. For the first time since the war began, the weight in his chest lifted. Somewhere far above, unseen, the gold shimmer expanded, reaching toward the stars. And in its pulse, the galaxy dreamed. When the sky cracked open over Bastion, it was not with fire, nor with the sound of thunder, but with silence, the kind of silence that follows when everything else has already been burned away. The first light of dawn, sickly and pale, crawled through the shattered windows of the chapel, catching in the broken glass and blood-streaked icons that once told stories of saints and martyrs. Now they were only reflections of what had been lost. And in the center of it all stood Inquisitor Kale and Sister Miria, both motionless, as if even time hesitated to come closer. The night had been long, the kind that strips a soul down to its truth, and there were no words left between them that hadn't already been burned into their hearts. Kale's hand was wrapped in bandages, blood seeping through the cloth where he'd held his sword too long. Miria's armor was cracked across the chest, scorched where the demon's claws had struck, but her eyes burned brighter than any fire still left alive in that place. Around them, the aftermath of the ritual lay quiet, the sigils smudged with ash, the candles melted into nothing, the floor still faintly pulsing with the echo of the warp. The child, the one they had both sworn to protect, slept beneath a shroud of torn cloth, alive but changed, her faint breath fogging the air like smoke from a dying ember. Kale stared down at her and for a long time said nothing. Then, as if dragging the words from the bottom of himself, he murmured, "She's stable, for now." Miria turned her gaze from the ruined altar to him, her voice steady but hollow. "You know what that means, Inquisitor. She carries the mark. It will never leave her." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. No mark leaves clean, not in this galaxy, not on anyone. His eyes flicked to her then, to the soot streaking her cheek, the blood that wasn't her own, and for a heartbeat the weight of duty seemed to lift, leaving only the man underneath. "You did what no one else could, sister. You saved her." "And in doing so, I may have doomed her," she said quietly, tracing a trembling hand over the child's forehead. "If the Ordo Hereticus finds out what she is." "They won't," Kale interrupted, sharp now, "because I'll write the report." He met her stare, "and in it she died here tonight." The silence between them deepened, thick as smoke. Miria understood what he was offering. Not mercy, defiance. To falsify a record in the Inquisition was to invite death, but it was also the only act of love left to those who lived and breathed by absolutes. She shook her head slowly. "You'll be hunted for that." Kale almost smiled. "I've been hunted before." Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the dust storm, cutting through the gloom in streaks of gold and rust. Miria watched it spill over the ruins, over the broken walls and the corpses of those who'd given their lives here, and thought of how strange it was that beauty could still exist in a place like this. The galaxy was wide and cruel and endlessly indifferent, and yet, here they stood, two souls who had found something resembling peace, even if only for a heartbeat. When Kale turned to leave, she followed him out into the light. The world beyond the chapel was scarred, the soil blackened by fire, the sky cracked with ash, but above it all hung the faint hum of engines, dropships descending through the haze, bearing the sigil of the ecclesiarchy. Reinforcements, late as always. "They'll take the survivors," Kale said, watching the ships draw nearer. "And they'll burn what's left. No one will ever know what happened here." Miria's hand brushed his. It was the smallest gesture, but in a galaxy that punished affection as weakness, it was an act of rebellion. "You'll make sure she's safe?" she asked, glancing back at the chapel where the child lay. He hesitated. "There's a world on the edge of segmentum obscurus," he said finally. "Forgotten by most charts. I'll see her there with people who still know how to pray." "And you?" Cale didn't answer. His gaze had already turned skyward, toward the light breaking through the smoke. "There's still work to be done." The transports touched down with a roar, sending waves of dust through the ruins. Miria watched as he disappeared into the haze, his figure swallowed by firelight and shadow, until she could no longer tell where the man ended and the war began. For a long moment, she stood there alone, the storm whipping her veil loose, her armor gleaming faintly beneath the rising sun. Then, as if guided by some instinct older than faith, she turned back to the chapel. The child stirred beneath the shroud, her tiny hand reaching out toward the warmth. Miria knelt beside her, gathering her into her arms. For the first time in what felt like centuries, she let herself weep, not for the dead, not for the lost, but for the fragile, defiant beauty of something still alive. Days later, the official reports listed the engagement at Bastion as a minor skirmish. No significant relics recovered. No mention of the child or the corruption that nearly tore reality open. To the Imperium, it was another victory, small, forgettable, one more line in the endless ledger of blood. But for those who had stood there, it was something else entirely. Cale's ship drifted through the void, its engines whispering against the silence of space. In his quarters, he laid his Rosarius beside his pistol and stared at the datapad glowing faintly on his desk. The false report waited for his seal. He hesitated only once before pressing his thumb to it, burning his mark into the file. Then, for the first time in his long life, he removed the signet of the Inquisition from around his neck and set it down. The metal hit the table with a dull, final sound. He stared at it for a long while, at the symbol that had defined him, consumed him, and finally whispered, "Emperor, forgive me." Outside his viewport, the stars burned cold and distant, each one a prayer cast into the dark. Somewhere out there, Miria was keeping the child safe. Somewhere, a new life had begun, fragile but real. Cale closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, the faint hum of the ship the only sound. The galaxy would continue to burn. It always did. But for the first time, he let himself imagine that somewhere amid the endless war, love, quiet, stubborn, human love, might still find a place to hide. And that thought, impossibly small against the vast dark, was enough to make him smile. In the centuries that followed, the name Bastion vanished from Imperial records. The world itself, consumed by storms, was deemed uninhabitable. But sometimes, when the wind carried a strange warmth through the ruins, and the air shimmered with a light that seemed to come from nowhere, some whispered that the Emperor's gaze still lingered there, not in judgment, but in remembrance. Of a night when two broken souls defied everything the Imperium demanded of them. Of a child who should not have lived. Of how, even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, some hearts still remember how to love.